Introduction to the Xuanjian Immortal Clan. Lu Jiangxian died suddenly by staying up late, but his remaining soul was attached to a cracked blue-gray bronze mirror, falling into the vast and boundless world of cultivation. The treacherous and unpredictable Dali Mountain, a small village by the Meichi River, was discovered by a small family. They then passed on the immortal teachings and began a magnificent new era. Family cultivation of immortals, no Virgin Mary, farming, no system, group image text. Chapter 1. Initial entry. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Lu Jiangxian had a very long dream, dreaming of planting rice in the field, dreaming of sword lights and shadows, dreaming of the immortal sect, the woman, and the great lake. Hand over the Tai-in exhalation and Qi practice technique, and the Moon Blossom Chronicles secret edict, and we can only discard your cultivation. A sweet and cold female voice rang in her ear, and Lu Jiangxian vaguely saw a hazy face, but could not see anything clearly. Bang! The intense shaking sensation suddenly woke Lu Jiangxian up. Strange colors came to mind, and Lu Jiangxian wanted to open his eyes and get up, his body ignoring his commands like a ghost pressing a bed. At this moment, a brilliant white light pierced through the dense darkness in front of me. Although the darkness kept surging like a tide, the pillar of light remained standing, unchanged like the sun for eternity. A dense array of golden spells burst out from it, stretching out in the darkness and scattering across the sky like stars. It's so beautiful, Lu Jiangxian thought in a daze as the number of spells increased, as if reaching a certain limit, he heard a clicking sound like broken glass. The world is bright. Lu Jiangxian saw a sky as vast as the sea, a dense and boundless primitive forest, and not far away was a crescent-shaped small lake. In that direction, a white stream of light slid into the shimmering lake. Below is a small hut topped with straw and a large rice field. In the tumultuous view, he flew like a light sparrow over the small brown village and fireworks, rowing over the clear river. In a startled glance, Lu Jiangxian caught sight of his reflection in the small river. It seems like a circular, sparkling thing. Lu Jiangxian thought in confusion, a faint omen emerging in his heart. I won't be a human anymore. Wow! The violent shaking struck again, and Lu Jiangxian quickly sank into the water. The small river was too shallow to absorb all the impact force, so he gently knocked against the blue stones at the bottom of the small river. This knock made Lu Jiangxian feel like he had been punched in the chest, feeling a bit suffocated and short of breath. However, his body, with the help of the turbulent river water and the recoil of the impact, steadily flipped over and became facing upwards, facing the rippling sun on the river surface. Didn't I stay up late in the rental room to change the plan? Lu Jiangxian silently looked at the sun on the river surface, the water waves flowing rapidly, causing the light patterns at the bottom of the water to constantly twist. Silently recalling the past in his memory, Lu Jiangxian felt a headache, only remembering himself lying on the bed in a state of emptiness, with smoke and the glow of neon lights passing by his side in the rented room. I opened a bottle of beer and sat at a dimly lit computer desk, feeling dizzy, my heart beating rapidly, and my breathing gradually becoming difficult. I seem to have hung up. This is also quite good. Don't worry about the future, don't worry about life. Perhaps after suppressing it for too long, Lu Jiangxian's mind suddenly came up with such thoughts, and his mood even felt a little excited. Observing the surroundings, the dark green tree branches hanging with air roots above my head, the agile fish swimming rapidly from time to time, and the faint sound of splashing water. Lu Jiangxian sighed. Just going on like this will make you bored to the point of going crazy. So he stared blankly at the sun slowly sliding down from above, the brilliant sunset crawling across the sky, and the water under the treetops gradually dimmed. During this period, 2 fish curiously patrolled around him, and even a crab attempted to flip him over. Until the moon moved to the treetops, the clear moonlight gently floated on the river surface, and Lu Jiangxian was pleasantly surprised to feel a cool breath seeping into the bottom of the river, vaguely bringing a sense of comfort. Yu reading www.yuukangshu.net. Watching the moonlight gradually converge above his body, as if he had come to life, forming a faint white halo, Lu Jiangxian was shocked and his mood underwent a completely different change. What is this? Does it swallow the essence of the sun and the moon? There are really fairies, supernatural powers, monsters, ghosts and gods in the world. He was shocked and thought, what have I become, a spirit? A wave of curiosity and joy rose deep within Lu Jiangxian's heart, and the faint halo seemed to have accumulated enough strength to float onto him. He felt a chill all over his body, sinking into a kind of non-sleeping meditation. After an unknown amount of time, the airflow became thinner and thinner. Lu Jiangxian suddenly woke up, and the crescent moon had faded from the sky. The sun jumped out of the tree tops, and the warm morning light scattered on the river surface. So fast. Lu Jiangxian couldn't help but be overjoyed. Upon careful observation, there was indeed a faint airflow hovering in his body, performing circular movements around the circular edges of his body. Even under Lu Jiangxian's deep breath, he could vaguely see a gray-blue mirror lying quietly at the bottom of the river, covered in various stones, and several swimming fish searching for food at the bottom of the river. That river crab is digging soil on the side. The visible range is about 1 meter around the body, not very clear, like watching a thick-headed TV when I was a child. This is who I am now, right? Lu Jiangxian smiled bitterly, and then he deliberately controlled the airflow to stop at the center of the mirror, causing the gray-blue mirror to emit a faint light. Besides emitting light, I haven't found any use for it. First, swallow the moonlight well, maybe there will be a qualitative change, he planned to himself. I don't know the material of the mirror, nor do I know how the outside world looks at objects with spiritual intelligence. Don't let any cultivator discover and casually lose your spiritual intelligence. Chapter 2. Li Family. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Li Mutian woke up and stared at his dilapidated roof with an open eye, a faint glow emanating from the pitch black. A few days ago, there was a small hole in the roof, and Li Mutian didn't have time to repair it. He didn't sleep well for 3 whole days. Looking at the woman sleeping soundly beside him, Li Mutian let out a deep sigh. The woman doesn't know how long or short it is. A few days ago, those immortals who were flying up and down in the Dali Mountains went crazy, wishing to dig the ground 3 feet. They were so shocked that everyone trembled and knelt down to kowtow every time a stream of light flew by. Li Mutian furrowed his brows and was filled with worry. The few small villages living at the foot of Dali Mountain have always been carefree, but these days they have been on edge and everyone is in danger. The deep mountain road is narrow, and the court cannot manage it. We don't care about it either. But when this immortal fights, a single immortal technique can defeat all the dogs in Lijing village. Li Mutian rolled over and couldn't sleep anymore. He stood up and looked out at the thick night outside the window. Guazi is getting bigger day by day, and it's getting bigger and bigger. I'll send him to Meichi River tomorrow to get some river fish and crabs. One day, being killed by the immortal method is also fate. The Li family has been farming for over 200 years, and my mother cannot move my father. Li Mutian lowered his eyebrows and shook his head, then turned his hand and left. The big yellow dog outside the door was still eating and sleeping, while Li Mutian walked slowly in the early morning mist, looking at the village of Lijing that had woken up from his sleep. Chicken crowing, dog barking, and smoke from cooking were emitting. Xiang Ping, ah! Li Mutian shouted at the room, and there was a clanging sound inside. As soon as the door opened, a half-year-old child rushed out with a creaking sound. Daddy! Li Xiangping's eyebrows and eyes were quite delicate, with a cunning look in his eyes as he looked up at Li Mutian. What's going on today? Go to Meichi River and get some river fish and crabs. Li Mutian waved his hand. There's not much work to do today. Go and prepare some fresh food for your mother. Okay. Li Xiangping nodded excitedly, picked up the rope basket and long fork, and then slipped away in one breath. Li Mutian laughed twice and headed towards the field. Meichi River is shallow and wide. There are a lot of mudflat and reeds on the bank. There are hundreds of geese and ducks raised in the village. They don't need to be fed. They are released in the morning and all go into the river. Later in the evening, walking alone to the riverbank, we called out. The geese and ducks were all cooked, and those who were used to hearing the sound followed us home. When Li Xiangping arrived, neither the geese nor the ducks were released. The sky above the Meichi River was turbulent, with two small rafts swaying on the shore. He rolled up his pants and sleeves, knelt down in the mud with his legs, and groped blindly in front of him. He fixed his eyes on the river and saw a blue tail. Good fish. Li Xiangping pressed down forcefully, holding his breath and thrusting fiercely. With a tightening of his right hand, he had already grabbed Qingwei's cheek and lifted it up. Hee hee. Li Xiangping laughed a few times and threw the fish into the basket. The fish in the Meichi River were determined not to be so foolish. Most likely, the green tail was a wild fish rushing down from the upstream, which allowed the child to take a big advantage. Looking at the soles of his feet, Li Xiangping's expression seemed to be puzzled. There seemed to be an overly smooth spot at the bottom of the water, with a faint silver light. Just as he was about to hold his breath and thrust into the depths, a loud cry rang out from the shore. Xiangping! Li Xiangping instinctively hid the basket behind him and looked towards the shore, only to see a child in his teens emerging from the reeds. Brother Yi, come and release the ducks. Cousin Li Yesheng nodded obediently and smiled, saying. I heard a strange thing in the early morning. A big stag was bitten by a snake and died at the entrance of the village. The corner was the size of a desk, so terrifying. Li Xiangping listened to his gossip and only breathed a sigh of relief, handing the basket forward. Look at this green tail, it was caught with bare hands. Good fish. Li Yesheng looked down at the basket and smiled enviously. Li Yesheng's father was bedridden for many years, and his elder brother was also idle. He often had to go to Li Mutian's house to beg for food, but his cousin Li Xiangping always treated him as his younger brother. After chatting for a while, Li Yesheng shook his head and said, All right, brother. I'll go back and see the ducks. If I lose too, my brother will definitely kill me. Go, go, go. Li Xiangping was also eager to see what was at the bottom of the river and quickly rushed to get people. Okay. As soon as he left, Li Xiangping held his breath and plunged into the bottom of the river, touching him back and forth, and finally finding a circular object for him. Puff. Li Xiangping wiped his face and glanced at the object in his hand. This thing is about the size of a palm, with a small circular plate in the center that is blue-gray in color, and a small iron edge that seems to be dark around it. There is nothing unusual about it. The front was broken into 7 or 8 pieces, not scattered by the hoop edge, but with a rather strange symbol painted on the back. Li Xiangping looked at it for a while but couldn't see what it looked like. It's a bit like my aunt's Jianzi, said Li Xiangping, who is the eldest in her family and only she can afford to use Jianzi. Normally, the village aunt takes care of it with water. When my aunt got that Jianzi, my mother took Li Xiangping to see it, which was indeed more convenient than water. But the bracelet in his hand was too blurry, and he couldn't see anything in the mist. Li Xiangping shook his head regretfully, threw it into the basket, and then turned to continue catching fish. Lu Jiangxian has been in the water for almost half a month, and from the 3rd day on, the moon's aura has stagnated and no longer increased. He worked hard for another week, but in the end, he didn't make any progress. He could do nothing but make himself shine. In the early morning, he was staring at the big green fish beside him in a daze. With one big hand, he pressed the fish directly into the mud, and when everything shook around, he grabbed the fish's gills with one hand and lifted it away. Lu Jiangxian was still in the complex emotions of meeting a stranger for the first time, but he saw a big hand directly picking up his body. Seeing a pretty big face, Jiangxian felt a little nervous for a moment. He saw the other party chattering a few words, then threw him into the basket with his back hand and stared at him with Qingwei's big eyes. In an instant, Jiangxian also realized a serious problem. He could hear it, but he may not be able to understand it. The pronunciation of this place's soil and water is somewhat similar to the dialect of the Fujian-Zhejiang region in the past. He really can't understand it at all, which means that if he can pronounce, the other person will not understand his own words at all, which will greatly hinder his integration into this world. Watching these small fish being thrown into the basket, Jiangxian gathered his energy and calmed his mind to explore the surrounding situation. Watching the boy carefully lift the wooden fork, Jiangxian let out a faint sigh. From this perspective, he could vaguely sense the boy's psychological activity, and his attention was probably focused on which fish at the bottom of the river. With the help of an exploratory perspective, the boy would mutter to himself every time he caught a fish. Soon, Jiangxian mastered the specific pronunciation of numbers 3 to 6 and different species of fish. Take a step and see. Watching the boy stand up and leave, Jiangxian sighed. The child looked like a farmer's child and should have handed over this bronze-like item to his parents first. Contact people more and see if you can gradually learn the local dialect of the land, and then find ways to enhance the power of the moon while preserving yourself. Chapter 3. Jianzi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Harm, Brother Xiangping. Li Xiangping walked back with a basket on his back, and a girl walked towards him from a distance. The girl had a round face and ordinary features, and her full smile added a lot of charm to her eyebrows and eyes. Yunmei, Li Xiangping smiled and looked at the girl, then turned around and handed over the basket of catch. Look at the good fish that brother caught. How many fish do you want to go back and try? This cannot be used. Tian Yun smiled and lowered her head. The girl had developed early, and she had already grown taller than 13-year-old Li Xiangping on November 11 this year. The men and women in Lijing village got married in the 13th five-year plan, and among their peers, only 2 people were of the most suitable age. The girl had already decided on the boy in front of her as her husband. No, take it. Li Xiangping forced 2 fish into Tian Yun's hands, but he didn't think much. Among the villagers, Uncle Tian was the kindest and he liked it the most. When he met his daughter, he naturally had to take care of her. Farewell to Tian Yun, Li Xiangping hurriedly walked into the house and put the basket into the small pond. He thought for a moment, took out the Jianzi, wiped it, stuffed it into his arms, picked up the 3 wooden boxes on the table, and went to the field. There, his 2 brothers are doing farm work with his father. The Li family has 4 brothers, namely Li Changhu, Li Tongya, Li Xiangping, and Li Qijing. When it comes to the Li family in Lijing village, none of these 4 brothers do not give a thumbs up. Tian Yun's father often envies these 4 brothers and says, Li Mutian is really lucky. Fortunately, Li Mutian didn't think so. As the only person in Lijing village who had traveled far, Li Mutian watched his child busy and in pain in the field. A good man should be a soldier and a scholar. He is a coward in the field. He pointed at Uncle Tian and cursed. But life is like this, those who have seen the light are actually in pain. Li Mutian has served in the army, killed people, and returned to Lijing village in his 40s to buy land with military pay and become a wealthy family. He is the least satisfied. Li Xiangping arrived at the field, and his elder brother Li Changhu had already been waiting under the shade of the trees. He was the oldest, with a beard on his mouth at the age of 17. Third brother, please walk slowly and not in a hurry. Li Changhu smiled and touched Li Xiangping's head, looking at him gently. Uncle Tian said you have gained a lot today. Too many brothers. Li Xiangping laughed heartily, tonight is a good meal. You. Li Changhu wiped his sweat and picked up a wooden box, shouting to the field, second brother. Come on. Second brother Li Tongya walked quickly with a hoe in hand. He sat down first and called out to Li Changhu, then smiled and looked at Li Xiangping. You guys eat, I'll go back. Li Xiangping was busy all morning, but he was so hungry that he panicked and quickly went home. When Lu Jiangxian was in Li Xiangping's basket, he felt an inexplicable traction attracting him. As he got closer to the Li family, this feeling became stronger and stronger. Passing by the big locust tree at the entrance of the village, this attraction reached its peak when entering the village. Lu Jiangxian felt chest tightness and shortness of breath, and the mirror in the basket trembled slightly, with a red light shining through it. That's a part of me, or something crucial to me, Lu Jiangxian felt a clear realization in his heart. To the north. In the direction of the big lake. As Li Xiangping slowly moved away from the village entrance, this attraction slowly disappeared, and Lu Jiangxian secretly remembered this direction in his heart. Adhering to Li Xiangping, he roughly wandered around the village. Combining his own perception of psychological activities and observation of target actions and tone, Lu Jiangxian could basically understand what everyone he saw was saying. He found that this seemed to be just an ordinary small village, without any martial arts masters flying over the eaves and walls, nor did he see any cultivators flying around. People work at sunrise and sunset in a standardized manner, and the tools and fields they use are not surprising. This place really seems to be an ordinary small village, and the best house is just a 2-story civil structure house. Lu Jiangxian pondered. If there were cultivators, no matter what, they wouldn't live in a small earthen house. A powerful force will bring strong productivity, and the small village in front of us is too backward. He has a rough idea in his mind, and his future plans are gradually forming a framework. Tonight, the Li family is busy outside, while the mother and 2 younger brothers are busy washing and cooking vegetables. Li Xiangping returned with a full load, while his younger brother Li Qijing quietly grabbed a nest of fat field mice while picking mulberry and raising silkworms in the back mountain. He was so happy that his father Li Mutian patted the shoulders of the 2 young men fiercely, praising them for raising their tails high. At the age of 14 or 15, when one is growing physically, a few dishes on the table have basically entered several people's stomachs. Li Mutian only tasted a chopstick, and his mother Lu Linyun looked at the 4 brothers with a smile. Only the big yellow dog was anxiously spinning around under the table, shuttling between their legs. After dinner, the moon slowly climbed up Dali Mountain, and Li Xiangping leaned against the corner of the wall with a long barnyard grass in his mouth. His father, Li Mutian, frowned and looked at the sky, as if searching for something. By the way, Dad. Li Xiangping patted his father's pants and took out the badge from his pocket. I picked up this thing in the river early in the morning. Oh, Li Mutian took Jianzi and squinted as he flipped back and forth. What good thing is it, not iron or copper? The cold moon slowly drifted down in front of the house, as if it had come to life, gradually converging above the mirror, forming a faint halo. Li Xiangping couldn't help but rub his eyes, as if the most beautiful moonlight he had seen in 13 years had appeared on that halo. Dad! Li Xiangping whispered. Shut up! Li Mutian was shocked and forced his eyes to move away from the lunar halo. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he thrust Jianzi into Li Xiangping's arms and whispered in his ear. Hide inside and ask your brothers to take out the knife. Li Xiangping saw such a fierce killing intent on his father's face for the first time, and his eyes narrowed slightly, like a poised eagle. Yes. His voice trembled, his legs softened, and he slowly moved into the door. The night was still good, and Li Xiangping pushed open the door. Brother. Father said quickly, take the guy to the door. Li Xiangping was almost about to shout out, and he trembled as he whispered to his 2 brothers leaning against the bedside. What? Li Changhu stood up in shock, holding on to Li Xiangping with both hands and looking at him with concern. Is your father in big trouble? What did you say? Li Tongya, the second brother, flipped over and took out 2 knives from under the bed. He also took off the rattan robe and long stick hanging on the wall, looked out the window with a gloomy expression, and whispered. "I believe it must be the enemy's doorstep." He handed the long sword and rattan robe, held the long stick in his hand, and patted Li Changhu. "Brother, there's no need to ask again. Third brother, take your mother and fourth brother and hide in the backyard." "Okay." Li Xiangping hurriedly went to find his mother, and Li Changhu quickly calmed down. He put on his rattan robe and walked towards the door with a knife. Outside the house, Li Mutian was standing at the door, quietly gazing at the melon field in front of the house. When both boys stood behind him, he waved his hand and took the long sword. "You two, one on the left and one on the right, explore the front and back of the house to ensure that there is no one around." The two quickly responded and went to investigate left and right. Li Mutian himself had already walked confidently to the melon field in front of the house, bent down and pulled out a person from the field. Chapter 16. On Evil Fate. You are listening at novelfull.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text. Chapter 10. Marriage. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Li Mutian walked to the front courtyard of the Tian family with his hands behind his back. Tian Yun, who was crouching and choosing vegetables while humming a song, had already looked up and saw Li Mutian. He smiled shyly and said, "Uncle Li." As soon as he released the vegetables in his hand, he quickly stood up and shouted into the room. "Dad! Uncle Muta is here." "It's me." Li Mutian responded with a smile and looked up and down at Tian Yun. "This girl has been outstanding for the past 3 years, with a curvaceous figure and a graceful figure. Although she may not be considered handsome, her facial features are also decent, and she has a unique charm when smiling." "Not bad, not bad." Li Mutian lifted his hand behind him, but it was carrying a wild goose. "Uncle Li is too polite." Tian Yun was taken aback when she saw Li Mutian carrying something. Upon closer inspection, she suddenly exclaimed in shock. "Is this a goose?" "The Book of Rites," Shi Hunli, says. "Hunli, give orders to accept and collect. Use geese. In the state of Yu, if the man wants to marry the woman, he will bring a wild goose to his door, and this ritual is called Natsai. Small households and farmers cannot tolerate too complicated rules. In Lijing village, not only are ordinary families like geese, but there are also many people who come empty-handed to propose marriage." Tian Yun also saw someone accept marriage for the first time, and only then did she realize it. "Are you curious about my flat?" Li Mutian chuckled and began to tease her. Tian Yun had already blushed from her ears to her neck, hesitating to cover it up out of reserve and shyness. However, she was afraid that Li Mutian would take it seriously, so she had to speak up. "Rare." Tian Shoshue walked out of the door and breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing the words. The stone that had been weighing on his heart for a long time fell to the ground. How could a father not see that his daughter's heart was already hanging on Li Xiangping? But this kid never leaks a single drop on weekdays, making it hard for people to see his thoughts. Tian Shoshue was also afraid of his daughter's embarrassment and remained silent. "Big brother." Tian Shoshue laughed and called out. Tian Shoshue followed Li Mutian at the age of 5, and at the age of 12, he joined the army with Pingyun. The three of them fought together in the army, not as brothers. Later, when he returned to the village, he killed the wealthy Yuan family and started farming. Li Mutian took care of himself everywhere, divided the land, and became a matchmaker to get him married. Tian Shoshue is already close to the Li family, and even Li Changhu was raised by him personally, looking even closer than his own children. If one's own daughter can marry into his family, how can she suffer losses? Tian Yunkai didn't know how many twists and turns his father had gone through in his heart. When he saw his father come out, he ran away and retreated, which even made Li Mutian burst into laughter. "Big brother, besides this marriage, there's also something important," Tian Shoshue shook his head helplessly and said seriously. What's up? Li Mutian looked up with some confusion. A few days ago, I went up the mountain to pass by the ancestral tomb of the Yuan family and heard some commotion. When I turned back to look for it, I saw nothing. Are there any remaining members of the Yuan family who have not been killed? Li Mutian raised his eyebrows and spoke gloomily. I think there are still those who dare to secretly offer sacrifices with family ties. Tian Shoshue felt uneasy in his heart and quickly comforted himself. Not bad, what you said makes sense. Li Mutian gradually relaxed and nodded at Tian Shoshue. I did ask back then, and there were no mistakes or omissions among the 5 members of the Yuan family. Big brother, on a good day, I shouldn't say such unlucky words. Tian Shoshue gave himself a mouthful, making Li Mutian chuckle softly. Stepping out of the Tian family, Li Mutian walked calmly on the dirt road, looking at Dali Mountain thoughtfully. After discussing the marriage, Li Mutian hummed back to the courtyard and crossed the front yard, where only 3 brothers were chatting at the wooden table. Li Qijing, the young son, is practicing with his eyes closed in his room. Although the moonlight is thin and the progress is slow during the day, Li Qijing works hard day and night to cultivate. Not a bit of time is wasted. In the courtyard, Li Xiangping was flipping back and forth as he looked at the Jade method. The cloth was ravaged and covered in creases, and ink stains had scattered a lot. Third brother, you should be more careful. Li Tongya chuckled and cursed lightly, but the knife and pen in his hand kept carving silently on the wooden slips. Big brother Li Changhu was carefully calculating the accounts of the land deed on the side. Upon hearing this, he raised his eyebrows and said. He has been tinkering all morning. Li Mutian stepped over the stone steps, picked up the clear tea from the wooden table, and sat down on the steps, casually saying. I went to the Tian family to propose marriage. Upon hearing this, Li Xiangping jumped up from his chair and stared anxiously at his father. What did the Tian family say? Tian Yun said she cares about you. Li Mutian took a slow sip of tea and sighed comfortably. Okay, that's great. Li Xiangping nodded excitedly. Ha ha ha. The 2 brothers couldn't help but laugh. Listen, Li Mutian thought of something else and put down his teacup, speaking seriously, although the immortal road is incredibly divine, who knows what kind of terror and crisis lurks. Our Li family is very thin. If something happens to you, who will inherit this Li family? As Li Mutian watched several young people get serious, he waved his hand and said. This almanac is both an opportunity and a calamity for my family. I quickly arranged a marriage for Changhu and arranged a marriage with Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com, hoping that he would give birth to a son as soon as possible. However, I was afraid that when something happened, my Li family would still have a glimmer of hope. You are the same, Li Mutian pointed to Li Xiangping and sighed helplessly as he looked at Li Tongya. As for Tongya, I'm old and can't touch you anymore. You have no intention of leaving behind these women in the village, but you also need to leave some offspring. Li Tongya nodded silently and took a few breaths before speaking. Don't worry, Dad, I have a sense of propriety. That would be best. Li Mutian wiped his white hair from his temples, feeling anxious in his heart. I am almost 60 years old. Although my body is strong and I have no worries about food and clothing, things are unpredictable. Let's arrange our family affairs earlier. Father. A crisp cry interrupted the somewhat oppressive atmosphere in the courtyard, and Li Qijing rushed out of the room and stood in front of several older brothers. I am about to refine into 81 strands of moonlight, condensing the Xianjing wheel. Li Qijing looked up proudly. My house has a strong ruler. Li Mutian had long heard his young son chatter about the mysterious scenery wheel of the birth rhythm gate, and couldn't help but joyfully embrace him, looking at the child and laughing heartily. Several brothers were also infected by the joyful atmosphere and smiled one after another. Li Changhu even pinched Li Qijing's face until the child repeatedly complained before letting go. The next time you receive a talisman, you will have to wait until the summer solstice. Li Tongya looked at the joyful courtyard and smiled, pondering. I missed out on the Huishua day because I couldn't prepare well. The next time will be the summer solstice, just wait a few more days. The way to cultivate immortality, Li Tongya has arrived. He quietly carved the Jade method on the wooden slips, but his heart was filled with waves and excitement. Chapter 4. Li Yesheng. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Uncle, spare your life. The person was so scared that they broke out of their wits. As soon as they landed, they begged for mercy and huddled together with Li Mutian. Ah! Please spare your life, uncle, spare your life, uncle, spare your life. Li Yesheng never expected that he only wanted to steal a melon to satisfy his craving. In the blink of an eye, the uncle he was most afraid of stood in front of him, making him unable to move. Unexpectedly, Li Mutian was still holding a long knife in one hand, which made him even more frightened. Yesheng. Li Mutian fixed his gaze and frowned, his face changing from sunny to cloudy. He stroked his chin and looked at him steadily. Li Yesheng is Li Yesheng's brother. Their father has been bedridden for years, but Li Yesheng spends his days idling around, playing around in the autumn breeze. Two young men also rushed over at the sound, and Li Tongya lifted his long stick and pressed it directly onto Li Yesheng's arm, scaring him into tears. Li Changhu lifted his head and couldn't help but be moved. Cousin. Li Changhu took a deep breath and asked in confusion. Why are you here? Li Tongya asked coldly, the strength of his long stick still in his hand. Stealing your melons. Li Mutian answered with a cold face as he looked at Li Yesheng stuttering. With a long knife in his hand, he turned his head and left. Cousin, I offended you. Li Tongya also withdrew his strength and lifted his stick. With just one sentence, he followed his father back to the house. Only Li Changhu was left to lift Li Yesheng, wipe his face, and gently comfort him with a few words before politely sending him out of the courtyard. In the house, Li Qijing and Li Xianping sat dumbfounded at the table, with Jianzi hidden in his arms. Li Xianping dared not move, but fortunately, his father's second brother walked into the hall shortly after. Where's big brother? He looked behind them and hurriedly asked. I'm seeing off the guests. Li Mutian shook his head. I know that Yesheng often comes to play with the autumn breeze, but I'm afraid that tonight's incident will leak out and cause the whole family to fly ashes and smoke out. Li Tongya found a small stool and sat down. Upon hearing this, he turned his head to look at Li Xianping and was about to speak. Creak. The door made a closing sound, and Li Changhu, the elder brother, looked puzzled. He sat on a stool and opened his mouth to his father, Li Mutian. Father, why is this necessary? He shook his head. Yesheng is just stealing a melon. If you don't act in favor of others, you must offend his family. What's his family? There's only one Li family, my legitimate concubine. Li Mutian leaned against the window and whispered, waving to the woman and young son, you squat at the front and back doors, and if anyone calls out. The two of them agreed and retreated. Li Mutian turned around and closed the doors and windows tightly, patting Li Xianping and saying. You say it. Li Xianping nodded vigorously and spoke softly. Today I went to Meichi River to catch fish and picked up something from the river. After speaking, he looked at his father Li Mutian and nodded, taking out a bracelet from his arms. Li Changhu looked at his younger brother, then at his father, and took the blue and gray Jianzi, but upon closer examination, he couldn't see why. Li Mutian took Jianzi from his eldest son's hand, searched for the small hole on the roof, moved a stone stool, and placed Jianzi under it, squinting at his two sons. Watching the moonlight fluctuate like water, and converge above the mirror like a swallow in a forest, a faint white, gem-like halo appeared. Li Changhu stood up from his chair, staring intently at the moon halo on Jianzi. Li Tongya also lost his composure and stared at Jianzi thoughtfully. For a whole cup of tea, everyone in the Li family silently stared at Jianzi without saying a word, with different expressions. Li Xiangping had already seen this picture for the second time, but he was also shocked and lost his composure, muttering to himself. I have never seen such a beautiful scenery since I was young. Let's not talk about you. I've never seen such a good thing before, neither have I. Li Mutian smiled low, but there was no sign of a smile, instead his eyes were fierce. This is probably a fairy thing. Li Tongya spoke quietly, picked up his long knife and kept wiping it. He stared at Jianzi as if calm, but his trembling hand betrayed his heart. The leak of rumors is also the disaster of my family's downfall. Li Changhu kept pacing in the hall, looking anxious and excited. If the lost item of the immortal is found tomorrow by casting a spell, how can we deal with it ourselves? Li Tongya stared fixedly at his father and said with some worry. Li Xiangping nodded and lowered his eyebrows in a muffled voice, saying, What immortals will reward, my family will benefit endlessly. Fart. Li Mutian waved his hand. I've heard that many immortals have bloodthirsty people, so don't do anything. This Jianzi fell into the water for a long time, and if you came to pick it up early, you would have picked it up. That round of obtaining us ordinary people, I think that immortal has probably encountered an unexpected situation. Li Changhu was horrified by this heinous remark, and he frowned without knowing what he was thinking. However, Li Tongya suddenly realized and spoke in a low and profound voice. But was he seen by that kid Li Yesheng? I showed this to my father in front of the house, and Yesheng should have been in the field at that time. Li Xiangping lowered his eyebrows and eyes. I'll go kill him. Li Tongya's expression was fierce. Without hesitation, he put on a rattan robe, picked up his knife, and walked out. Li Xiangping saw this expression on his brother's face for the first time, and couldn't help but take 2 more glances. Come back. Li Mutian frowned and called out to Li Tongya, giving Li Xiangping a glance that made him look flustered. Father. Li Tongya finally became anxious and spoke forcefully when looking for the Shuyuan website www.zhaoshuyuan.com. Li Yesheng is a ruthless and unscrupulous person who is known for his recklessness and extravagance, but also for his internal and external affairs. Instead of letting him speak up and let the rumors lead to the downfall of our Li family, it would be better to let him die first. It seems that second brother has learned a lot from the village gentleman, Li Xiangping thought silently, looking down in shame. When his father sent the 3 of them to study together, both brothers were liked by the gentleman. Only when I was young and ignorant, mischievous, now I can't understand the idioms in my brother's language. If your younger brother eats inside out and doesn't speak too strictly, will you also kill him? Li Mutian chuckled and asked his second son in reverse. We don't have such a coward in our family. Li Tongya said indifferently. Li Mutian shook his head, raised his hand to straighten the wooden table, leaped forward, lightly tapped on the table, and pulled out a wooden box from the roof beam. Placing the wooden box on the table, he met the 3 brothers in front of him and said. There are some things I want you to know. At the age of 13, I left my hometown and entered Anli County along the Gully Road. General Yang took the imperial order to attack Shangyue and conscripted troops on Gully Road. At that time, your father and I had nowhere to go, so we had to join the army. General Yang is strict in governing the army, but he also eats and lives with me like a family. He taught us the tactics of the Vietnamese army and urged us to practice martial arts well. These tactics are widely spread, easy to learn but difficult to master, and even ordinary people who practice them are only agile and not particularly extraordinary. Li Mutian sighed and continued, seeing that the others were listening attentively. After returning to my hometown, I read and wrote books, and silently wrote the tactics in this wooden slip. I have already asked you to practice it carefully, and now there may not be any famous names. This is one of them. Li Mutian opened the wooden box, in which lay miscellaneous items such as a wooden slip, a talisman, and a few pieces of broken silver and glass. Chapter 6. Jade and Stone. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. But it was said that Li Tongya and Li Xiangping entered the reed marsh, stroking open the layers of reeds and looking up. The green and gray Jianzi was warm and shining with white light. Li Xiangping looked in the direction and whispered. This is in the direction of Wangyue Lake, just walk along Gully Road for half an hour. Li Tongya shook his head and said, I can't walk on Gully Road. I'll pass through the reed marshes. Li Xiangping responded in a low voice and crossed over with his brother. Lu Jiangxian only felt that the gravitational force was getting stronger and stronger, and entering the reed marsh was even more dazzling. A blurry scenery appeared in front of him, seemingly a cool and transparent lake, with more than 10 white gulls and egrets resting on one foot on the shore. As Li Xiangping continued to move forward, the blue and gray Jianzi in his hand became increasingly hot, making him uneasy. He looked up at his second brother, and Li Tongya remained silent with a cold face, only his eyes filled with worries. Is Xianyuan really something that ordinary people can touch their fingers? Li Xiangping touched the mirror without feeling hot. Good Jianzi, we'll be here soon, he murmured, holding a blue-gray precious mirror. Not long after, the two of them emerged from the overlapping reed marshes, and the shimmering moon lake and a shoal of startled gulls and egrets leaped into view. Lu Jiangxian looked straight at a rocky sandbar in the lake. Among the moss-covered rocks, a sparkling white jade was stuck tightly in the crevice. The hot blue-gray Jianzi spewed out a pale white moonlight, and the sandbar appeared vaguely in front of Li Tongya and Li Xiangping, with white jade shining between the cracks. Li Xiangping and Li Tongya exchanged a glance, both seeing surprise and joy in each other's eyes. Li Xiangping nodded vigorously, took off his clothes, and was about to step into the lake. Wait a minute. Li Tongya grabbed him and shook his head. I'll go get it, you hold the Jianzi and wait on the shore. If the moon moves to that position, I haven't come back yet. He pointed to the direction in the sky. You just hide Jianzi in the reed marshes and run towards Gully Road, don't go home. Li Tongya looked at his younger brother solemnly. Wait until the sun rises 3 times before coming back to see the situation. Yes. Li Xiangping unconsciously began to cry and wiped away his tears as he looked at his second brother. Li Tongya smiled and took off his clothes, revealing his robust arms. He turned around and swam towards the middle of the lake, leaving Li Xiangping hiding in the reed marshes, staring blankly at his brother. A few years ago, he came to Wangyue Lake with his father and brothers. He swam back and forth countless times, and then swam to the center of the lake with a familiar light car. He cautiously explored through many crevices in the rocks, and in just one column of incense, he wandered around the sandbar. No, Li Tongya frowned and carefully checked again, taking out 5 or 6 small river crabs. Sure enough, he noticed a slight cool sensation between his fingers, touching something smooth. With both fingers exerting force, he took out a jade stone that was 2 fingers wide. This jade is in the shape of a long strip, with some written patterns on its surface. Li Tongya distinguished it against the moonlight. Tai. Yu. Qi. Yang Luan. He only vaguely recognized a few words. Li Tongya went to his master's place to recognize characters when he was young, and most of the numbers could be recognized. However, the patterns on this jade are complex and difficult to recognize. Calmly looking at the shore, he held the jade in his hand and swam upstream towards the shore. Third brother. He landed and called out low to the reed marshes, and Li Xiangping came to explore. Li Tongya was about to display the jade when he opened his hand. The jade turned into a white light and fell into the mirror with a swoosh. The two of them trembled with fear at this incident, looking at the white light surging on the mirror, and the moonlight transforming into halos casting into the mirror. However, Lu Jiangxian felt as if he had been struck by lightning. A white light rushed straight into him, and a vast sea of knowledge rushed into his mind. He let out a painful cry and fainted happily. Li Tongya and Li Xiangping watched as Jianzi in his hand swallowed the jade and slowly calmed down, and the white light gradually dimmed. The golden-red morning glow climbed up the sky and landed on Li Tongya's bare upper body, revealing golden lines. He lowered his head and said to his younger brother, "Go home first." Li Mutian sat at the red-painted wooden table, listening to his two sons explain the ins and outs of the story. He nodded and said to Li Tongya, "Well done." He and Li Changhu tossed and turned all night and couldn't sleep. Now that they have returned safely, his heart has finally settled. Our front door and backyard are not small, and the backyard is even closer to the back mountain. In front of the 2 melon fields, I thought about building 2 houses. The left and right arches connected to form a large courtyard, and the front door was closed, so that no one could sneak a peek. Li Mutian said slowly that he had this idea in his early years. The children grew up day by day and were about to split up. With his savings, the Li family can be said to be a wealthy and influential family in the village. Li Mutian returned from the army and bought over 10 acres of paddy fields, along with more than 5 acres of good land inherited from his father, totaling nearly 20 acres. Lijing village is good at water and soil to support people. Reed marshes and mudflat are living treasures. If manual labor is removed, 20 acres of land can support more than 10 people in a good year. The Li family is already at the level of being able to close their doors and become landlords when looking for a book garden. www.zhaosuiyuan.com. It is precisely because the Li family has food and land that his 4 children are able to read and write, which means that Li Mutian has never been accustomed to idle wealthy households. This requires several children to read and work in agriculture every day, so that they can all eat and live well after dividing the family. Nowadays, this family cannot be separated, and the daughter-in-law also needs to find someone who cares about herself. Li Mutian remembered the appearance of those wealthy families he had seen in the city. They were the legitimate relatives of the courtyard, studying and serving as officials, practicing military generals and soldiers. How magnificent! On the other hand, the poor farmers are completely separated. If you don't pull me, I won't pull you. That's it. Li Mutian's eyes lit up and he shouted at the 2 children. Go to the field and call your elder brother back to level the foundation. Leave the field for the tenants to handle. Your 4th brother doesn't need to go picking mulberry trees in the afternoon, so he will spend a whole day reading at the teacher's place in the future. Okay, Li Xiangping tossed and turned all night, but still full of energy. Upon hearing this, he quickly went out. Li Tongya looked at his father and pondered for a moment before speaking. My father wants to learn the clan laws and regulations in that book, establish ancestral halls, open clan mansions, study and serve, and practice military skills. My Li family has saved up 200 years, it's also time. Li Mutian smiled and waved his hand. As for studying and practicing martial arts, the ancient Li road is extremely dangerous. 10 people die and 9 live in and out of Dali Mountain, and studying and practicing martial arts cannot be sold to the emperor of you. It's just a pursuit of inheriting family business and seeking self-protection. Li Tongya nodded and whispered. There is nothing more wonderful than reading and practicing martial arts. Don't talk nonsense here. Li Mutian laughed heartily, patted Li Tongya's shoulder, and walked out with his head tilted back and hands in his hands. Chapter 11. Summer Solstice. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text. Chapter 18. 3 years. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text. Chapter 12. Golden Light Technique. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text.